This is Matthew Cratter from Bitcoin University, and today I wanted to talk about the Fed's bloody balance sheet and fiat wars. This is in honor of Memorial Day and everyone who gave their lives serving in the United States Armed Forces. I should say none of this is to diminish the bravery and sacrifice of those who served and those who gave their lives in the wars that I'm going to be talking about. But I want to highlight some important differences, some important economic differences between how the U.S. used to finance its wars and how we do it now. So, for example, for World War II, the U.S. raised taxes, and in fact, the top tax bracket got up to 90%. There was a surtax. You can scroll down here and see that even the lowest tax bracket was something like 22%. Something similar happened for the Korean War, which was financed not just using war bonds, but it was financed mainly by taxation, as this Wikipedia article demonstrates. And then the Vietnam War as well. President Johnson raised taxes, created a temporary 10% income tax surcharge to help to pay for the war. Now, what has happened over the past 20 years, both under Democrat and Republican administrations, is instead we've had tax cuts combined with a lot of very expensive foreign wars. I'll link to this article below, which actually shows that President Obama's first term tax cuts were actually bigger than President Bush's tax cuts of 2001 and 2003. But this is a very different way of doing things than we've historically done. Don't get me wrong, I'm certainly not against starving the U.S. government beast by limiting how much revenue it can get its dirty, wasteful little hands on. As Nietzsche says, government is the coldest of all cold monsters, and everything the government has, it has stolen. But I would say that the only thing worse than raising taxes to pay for a war is not raising taxes to pay for a war, and then secretly funding the war through money printing that mostly hurts the working and middle classes through inflation, and actually also defers the actual cost of the war to subsequent generations who haven't even been born yet. If you're enjoying this video so far, I just ask you to hit that subscribe button and help to get this channel up to 200,000 subscribers. We're almost there. And this leads us to the main point of this video, which is to point out that the war on terror, the last 20 years of wars that the U.S. has fought in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and other places in the wake of 9/11, these wars have cost approximately $8 trillion, while over that same period of time, the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank in the U.S., has added approximately $8 trillion worth of assets to its balance sheet. Now, this is a mixture of government bonds and mortgage-backed securities, but I think the analogy is important. Basically, there hasn't been enough government revenue, enough government tax revenue to pay for these wars, so the U.S. has had to issue all of this treasury debt, all of these government bonds, and then the Fed has been buying the majority of them, certainly for the last 8 years or so. So one way of thinking about this is that the war on terror has been completely or almost completely financed by the Federal Reserve. Now, when you combine this with the end of the draft, conscription ended in the U.S. in 1973, you end up with a really strange situation. In World War II, approximately 11% of all Americans actually fought in the war. By contrast, the war on terror over the past 20 years, approximately 2.77 million Americans have served, and that's only about half a percentage point of Americans have served in these wars. So for the past 20 years, you have the situation where the U.S. has been spending trillions and trillions of dollars on foreign wars while sending only a tiny percentage of its population to go fight in those wars. And many of us at various times have forgotten that the U.S. is even involved in these wars. And this is a very, very sinister thing because it's not just the U.S. troops that have been hurt, but obviously everyone on the ground, especially the women and children and all the innocents who have been quote unquote collateral damage in these wars. And this has all been paid for essentially by the Fed money printer. When you hear the word fiat, this is what you should think. You should think empty promises, lies, death, and destruction. U.S. dollars, we've said many, many times, is secured by proof of war. So when you take into account how much energy Bitcoin miners use in the proof of work algorithm, you have to always compare that to the cost of proof of war. And this has been $8 trillion for the U.S. And it's been just untold human suffering, death, and destruction. These are the images from the initial bombing in Iraq, the beginning of the Iraq War in 2003. We should also remember the bombing of the Kunduz hospital in Afghanistan by a U.S. Air Force gunship. This was an accident, but it ended up killing a lot of innocent people. And this happened under President Obama. This was something that most people don't even know that happened. And so this is one reason that I'm fighting for a future with Bitcoin. It's one thing to fight for wars that you believe in that are important, but when you don't have very many people serving in those wars, and when they're paid for by Fed or other central bank money printing, you really don't have a situation where the war is being fought seriously and openly, and the cost of it being really borne and considered by the population. A future without Bitcoin will look very similar to this. It'll be endless wars fought by drones and paid for by money printing, a continuation of the proof of war system, where by contrast to a Bitcoin future, you will not be able to fight a war without the social and financial approval of the people, and you won't be able to resort to the money printer, but instead you'll need to actually persuade people to part with their Bitcoin in order to fund the war. And then the people can decide, is this a good use of our capital and our savings, or is it not? And this is a true proof of work system where you cannot wage these bloody wars using your central bank's balance sheet. If you want to investigate this further, Alex Gladstein has done some great work over the years. Here's probably his major essay on this, The Invisible Cost of War in the Age of Quantitative Easing, where he has a very similar thesis. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video, and let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.